The rain hammered against the windows of the small diner on Route 66, somewhere between Flagstaff and Winslow, Arizona. Margaret wiped down the same counter for the third time in 10 minutes, her movements slow and deliberate, as if each motion required tremendous effort. At 52, she carried the weight of grief in every step, her body telling the story of 7 pregnancies that ended too soon, 7 tiny graves in the cemetery behind St. Mary's Church. The bell above the door chimed, and 3 women entered, shaking raindrops from their designer jackets. Margaret recognized them immediately. Sarah Henderson, the bank manager's wife, accompanied by her usual companions, Linda and Patricia. They were the type of women who measured their worth by the misfortunes of others, finding comfort in their cruelty. "Well, look who's still here," Sarah announced loudly, her voice cutting through the quiet atmosphere like a blade. "I'm surprised this place hasn't collapsed under the weight." Her companions giggled, the sound sharp and malicious. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the coffee pot. She had endured their comments for months now, ever since her husband Robert died in the construction accident. The insurance money had barely covered the funeral costs, leaving her with this small diner that barely kept her afloat. "3 coffees?" Margaret asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Make sure the cups are clean," Linda sneered. "We don't want to catch anything." The implication hung heavy in the air, and Margaret felt her cheeks burn with shame. As she poured the coffee, her hands shook more violently. The hot liquid splashed onto the counter, and Sarah jumped back dramatically. "Typical! Can't even pour coffee properly. No wonder Robert worked himself to death, probably trying to escape this mess." The words hit Margaret like physical blows. Robert had been her anchor, the only person who truly understood the depth of her pain. Each miscarriage had broken them a little more, but they had clung to each other through the darkness. Now, 6 months after his death, she faced the world alone. "Maybe if you spent less time eating and more time working, this place wouldn't be falling apart," Patricia added, her voice dripping with disdain. 7 babies lost. Maybe it's nature's way of saying some people shouldn't reproduce. Ah. Margaret's vision blurred with tears. The coffee pot slipped from her grasp, shattering on the floor in a cascade of ceramic and steaming liquid. The sound echoed through the diner like a gunshot, and for a moment, everything was silent, except for the rain against the windows. "Now look what you've done," Sarah laughed. "Clean it up. We're not paying for this disaster." Margaret knelt on the floor, her knees protesting against the hard linoleum. As she gathered the broken pieces, each shard seemed to represent another piece of her shattered life. The women continued their assault, their words becoming background noise to the storm raging both outside and within her heart. The bell chimed again, and heavy footsteps approached. Margaret didn't look up, too ashamed to meet another customer's eyes. She heard the scrape of a chair being pulled out, the soft thud of someone sitting down at the counter. "Excuse me, ladies." The voice was deep, weathered, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "I think you've said enough." Margaret finally looked up to see an elderly Native American man, his silver hair braided down his back, wearing a simple flannel shirt and jeans. His face was lined with years of experience, his dark eyes holding a wisdom that seemed to see straight through to the soul. There was something about his presence that commanded respect, a quiet dignity that filled the small space. Sarah turned, her expression shifting from cruel amusement to irritation. "This is a private conversation, old man. Mind your own business." The man's gaze never wavered. "When someone is being hurt in front of me, it becomes my business. This woman has done nothing to deserve your cruelty." You don't know anything about her," Linda interjected, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. "I know enough," the man replied calmly. "I know she's working hard to survive. I know she's faced losses that would break most people. And I know that your words come from your own emptiness, not from any truth about her." Margaret remained on the floor, frozen by the unexpected intervention. No one had defended her in months. The broken ceramic cut into her palms as she gripped the pieces tighter, afraid that if she moved, this moment of protection would disappear. "She's a failure," Sarah spat, but her voice had lost some of its venom. 7 dead babies, a dead husband, and a failing business. If that's not failure, what is? The man stood slowly, his full height impressive despite his age. Failure is having a heart so small that you find joy in another's pain. Failure is mistaking cruelty for strength. This woman has survived losses that would destroy you, and she's still here, still fighting. That's not failure, that's courage. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. "We're just telling the truth." "Truth?" The man's voice carried a note of sadness. "The truth is that this woman has a heart pure as gold, tarnished only by the pain others have caused her. The truth is that she gets up every morning despite her grief and opens this place to serve people who don't deserve her kindness. The truth is that you 3 are so afraid of your own inadequacies that you need to tear down someone who's already fallen." Margaret felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of shame. Someone saw her pain, acknowledged her struggle, recognized her worth. The validation felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Sarah's face flushed red. "How dare you?" "I dare because I've lived long enough to recognize strength when I see it," the man interrupted. "And I see more strength in this woman's little finger than in all 3 of you combined. She's faced the worst life can offer, and she's still standing. You face a rainy afternoon and turn into monsters." The 3 women exchanged glances, their earlier bravado crumbling under the man's steady gaze. The silence stretched, broken only by the rain and Margaret's quiet sobs. "We don't have to listen to this," Sarah finally muttered, but she was already reaching for her purse. "No, you don't," the man agreed. "You can leave, but before you go, you owe this woman an apology." "We don't owe her anything," Linda protested, but her voice was weak. The man's expression didn't change, but something in his demeanor shifted, becoming more formidable. "Everyone owes basic human decency. You've failed in that debt today." Margaret slowly stood, still clutching the broken pieces of the coffee pot. Her legs felt unsteady, but the man's presence gave her strength she didn't know she still possessed. "Keep your apologies," Margaret said quietly, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I don't need them. I know who I am, and I know what I've survived. Your opinions don't define me." The 3 women hurried toward the door, their earlier confidence completely shattered. As they reached the exit, Sarah turned back one last time. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," the man said simply. "It's over because you're going to leave this woman alone from now on, because deep down you know she's better than you'll ever be." The door slammed behind them, the bell's chimes seeming to celebrate their departure. Margaret stood in the sudden silence, still holding the broken ceramic, unsure what to do next. The man approached slowly, his movements gentle and non-threatening. "Let me help you with that," he said, gesturing to the broken pot. Together they cleaned up the mess, working in comfortable silence. Margaret found herself stealing glances at this stranger who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't dared to voice. "Thank you," she finally whispered as they finished cleaning. "No need for thanks," he replied, settling back onto the stool at the counter. "I'm Joseph Crowfeather. And you are?" "Margaret. Margaret Williams." She paused, then added, "Most people call me Maggie." "Maggie," he repeated as if testing the name. "A good name. Strong." She poured him a fresh cup of coffee from a new pot, her hands steadier now. "I don't understand why you helped me. You don't even know me." Joseph wrapped his weathered hands around the warm mug. "I know enough. I know you're in pain, and I know you're fighting to survive it. That's all I need to know." Margaret felt a sob building in her chest. They're not wrong, though. I have lost 7 babies. My husband is dead. This place is failing. Maybe I am a failure. Look at me, Maggie. Joseph's voice was firm but kind. When she met his eyes, he continued, Failure isn't about what happens to you. It's about giving up. You're still here. You're still fighting. That makes you a warrior, not a failure. The rain continued its assault on the windows, but inside the diner, something had shifted. The oppressive weight that had pressed down on Margaret for months felt lighter, as if Joseph's words had lifted some invisible burden. I don't feel like a warrior, she admitted. I feel broken. Broken things can be mended, Joseph said gently. Sometimes they're even stronger after they heal. The Japanese have a practice called kintsugi. They repair broken pottery with gold, making the cracks part of the beauty. Your cracks don't make you less valuable, Maggie. They make you unique. Margaret had never heard of kintsugi, but the image resonated deeply. She thought of all her broken pieces, the lost babies, the dead husband, the struggling business, the cruel words. Could they really become part of something beautiful? How do you know all this? She asked. Joseph smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. I've lived 83 years on this earth. I've seen enough pain to fill the Grand Canyon and enough healing to know that both are part of the same journey. My people have a saying, the wound is the place where the light enters you. They talked as the afternoon wore on, the rain gradually subsiding to a gentle patter. Joseph told her about his life on the reservation, about his late wife who had also struggled with pregnancy, about the children they had eventually adopted and raised with love. Margaret found herself sharing stories she hadn't told anyone, about Robert's gentleness during her darkest moments, about the dreams she'd had for each lost baby, about the small joys that still managed to surface despite her grief. You know, Joseph said as the sun began to break through the clouds, my grandson is looking for work. He's good with his hands, reliable. This place could use some fixing up. Margaret looked around the diner with new eyes. The peeling paint, the worn linoleum, the outdated equipment, she had seen only decay. But now she began to see potential. I can't afford much help, she admitted. He doesn't need much, just fair wages and respect. 2 things those women never learned to give. As the evening approached, other customers began to filter in. Truckers seeking coffee and pie, locals grabbing dinner before heading home. Margaret noticed that Joseph's presence seemed to change the atmosphere of the place. People were friendlier, more patient, more willing to linger and chat. You have a gift, she told him during a quiet moment. We all have gifts, he replied. Yours is creating a space where people feel welcome, even when you're hurting. That's rare, Maggie. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. When closing time arrived, Joseph helped her clean up, his movements efficient and practiced. As they worked, Margaret realized that for the first time in months, she wasn't dreading the lonely evening ahead. Will you come back? She asked as he prepared to leave. If you'd like me to. I would. Very much. Joseph paused at the door, his hand on the handle. Maggie, those women will probably try to cause trouble again. They don't like being shown their true selves. Margaret straightened her shoulders, feeling a strength she'd forgotten she possessed. Let them try. I'm not the same person I was this morning. No, Joseph agreed. You're not. You're remembering who you've always been underneath the pain. After he left, Margaret stood in her empty diner, looking out at the desert landscape bathed in the golden light of sunset. The silence no longer felt oppressive. Instead, it felt full of possibility. She thought about Joseph's words, about kintsugi and golden repairs, about wounds where light enters. For the first time since Robert's death, she allowed herself to imagine a future that held more than mere survival. The next morning brought clear skies and renewed energy. Margaret arrived at the diner early, seeing it through fresh eyes. She made a list of repairs needed, improvements that could be made with limited resources. When Joseph arrived for breakfast, she was ready with plans and questions. "Your grandson," she began. "When can he start?" Joseph's smile was answer enough. Over the following weeks, the diner began to transform. Tommy Crowfeather, Joseph's grandson, proved to be everything his grandfather had promised. He repaired the leaking roof, fixed the temperamental coffee machine, and painted the walls in warm, welcoming colors. More importantly, he treated Margaret with the same respect his grandfather showed, never making her feel like a charity case. The changes weren't just physical. Word spread about the confrontation with the three women, and the community's response surprised Margaret. People she barely knew stopped by to offer support, to share their own stories of loss and recovery, to simply sit and enjoy the peaceful atmosphere Joseph's presence brought to the place. "You're becoming a gathering place," Joseph observed one afternoon as they watched a group of elderly men play checkers in the corner booth. "Is that good or bad?" Margaret asked. "It's what this place was meant to be, a refuge, a place where people can be themselves without judgment." Margaret looked around at the transformed space, the fresh paint, the repaired fixtures, the faces of people who had become regulars. But more than the physical changes, she felt the shift within herself. The crushing weight of grief hadn't disappeared, but it no longer defined her every moment. "I want to do something," she announced suddenly. "Something to help other people who are struggling." Joseph raised an eyebrow, encouraging her to continue. "What if we started a support group for people dealing with loss, with grief, with feeling like failures? What if we gave them a place to come where they wouldn't be judged?" "That's a beautiful idea, Maggie, but are you ready for that responsibility?" Margaret considered the question seriously. "I don't know if anyone's ever really ready, but I know what it feels like to be alone with pain. If I can help even one person feel less alone, isn't that worth trying?" Joseph's proud smile was all the encouragement she needed. The support group started small. Just Margaret, Joseph, and two other people who had heard about the idea through the informal network that connected the community's wounded souls. They met on Tuesday evenings after the diner closed, sharing coffee and stories in the warm glow of the overhead lights. Sarah Henderson and her companions made good on their threat to cause trouble. They spread rumors about the diner, complained to the health department about imaginary violations, and tried to convince other businesses to boycott Margaret's establishment. But their efforts backfired. The community rallied around Margaret and business actually improved. "Funny how that works," Joseph observed one evening as they counted the day's receipts. "Sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you turns out to be the best thing." "Do you really believe that?" Margaret asked. "I believe that we can choose what our experiences mean. Those women thought they were destroying you. Instead, they helped you find your strength." Margaret nodded, understanding flooding through her. "They showed me who I don't want to be. And more importantly, they helped you remember who you are." Doom! As autumn painted the Arizona landscape in brilliant colors, Margaret's support group had grown to include a dozen regular members. There was Elena, whose teenage son had died in a car accident; Frank, a veteran struggling with PTSD; Maria, whose husband had left her after 20 years of marriage; and others, each carrying their own burden of pain. "The thing about grief," Margaret told the group one evening, "is that it makes you feel invisible. Like your pain doesn't matter because everyone else seems to be moving on with their lives." Heads nodded around the circle. These were people who understood the isolation that comes with profound loss. "But sitting here with all of you, I realize that pain shared is pain diminished, not eliminated but made bearable." Elena wiped tears from her eyes. "I haven't felt this understood in months." "That's because we're not trying to fix each other," Frank added. "We're just witnessing each other's truth." Joseph, who usually listened more than he spoke during these sessions, cleared his throat. "In my culture, we believe that every person carries medicine for someone else. Margaret's medicine is creating space for healing. Each of you carries medicine too. You just have to discover what it is. After the group dispersed that night, Margaret and Joseph sat in comfortable silence, cleaning up the coffee cups and folding the chairs. "I'd never thanked you properly," Margaret said suddenly. "For what? For seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for defending me when I couldn't defend myself, for believing in me when I had stopped believing in anything." Joseph paused in his cleaning. "You don't need to thank me for recognizing the truth. Your heart was always pure gold, Maggie. It just needed polishing." Margaret felt tears threaten, but they were tears of gratitude rather than grief. "I don't know where I'd be without you." You'd be exactly where you needed to be," Joseph replied. "Maybe it would have taken longer, maybe the path would have been different, but you would have found your way. Strong people always do." As winter approached, bringing cooler temperatures and shorter days, Margaret realized that an entire year had passed since Robert's death. The anniversary she had dreaded arrived quietly, marked not by the crushing despair she had expected, but by a gentle sadness mixed with gratitude for the life they had shared. She visited Robert's grave that morning, bringing fresh flowers and news of all the changes in her life. "I think you'd be proud," she whispered to the headstone. "I'm not the same broken person I was a year ago. I'm still sad that you're gone, and I still miss you every day, but I'm not drowning anymore." A gentle breeze stirred the flowers, and Margaret chose to interpret it as Robert's approval. That evening, the support group gathered for a special session, a celebration of survival, of growth, of the strength they had found in each other. "A year ago, I thought my life was over," Margaret told the assembled group. "I thought that losing Robert meant losing everything that mattered. But I've learned that love doesn't die with the person. It transforms into something else, into the capacity to love others, to help others, to create meaning from suffering." The group had grown beyond her wildest expectations. New members joined regularly, drawn by word of mouth and the reputation the diner had developed as a place of healing. Margaret had hired 2 part-time employees to help with the increased business, and Tommy had become a full-time maintenance supervisor, taking pride in keeping the place running smoothly. "I want to share something," Eleanor said, standing up with uncharacteristic confidence. 6 months ago, I couldn't get out of bed most days. I thought about joining my son, about ending the pain permanently. But this group, this place, Margaret's example, it all showed me that there was another way through the darkness." She paused, gathering courage. "I've decided to go back to school. I want to become a grief counselor. I want to help other parents who've lost children." The room erupted in applause, and Margaret felt her heart swell with pride. This was what healing looked like, not the absence of pain, but the transformation of pain into purpose. "That's beautiful, Eleanor," Margaret said when the applause died down. "You're taking your deepest wound and turning it into your greatest gift." Joseph nodded approvingly. "The wounded healer is the most powerful healer of all." Udis. As the evening wound down and members began to leave, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The cruel words that had once seemed like the final blow had actually been the catalyst for her transformation. The women who had tried to destroy her had unknowingly set her on a path to discovering her true purpose. "Ironic, isn't it?" she said to Joseph as they performed their nightly clean-up ritual. "What's that?" "Those women thought they were showing me my failures. Instead, they helped me find my calling." Joseph chuckled. "The universe has a sense of humor like that. Sometimes our enemies are our greatest teachers." "Do you think they know? What they started, I mean." "I doubt it. People like that rarely understand the consequences of their actions. But it doesn't matter what they know. What matters is what you chose to do with their cruelty." Margaret nodded, understanding. She had chosen to transform poison into medicine, hatred into healing, isolation into community. As spring returned to Arizona, bringing wildflowers and renewed life to the desert, Margaret stood outside her diner one morning, watching the sunrise paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The simple building that had once felt like a prison now felt like a sanctuary. The sign above the door had been repainted, the letters bright and welcoming. But it was the smaller sign in the window that meant the most to her. Healing Hearts Support Group, Tuesdays 7 p.m, all welcome. Joseph approached from across the parking lot, his daily walk complete. At 84, he moved more slowly than when they first met, but his spirit remained as strong as ever. "Beautiful morning," he observed, joining her in watching the sunrise. "They all are now," Margaret replied. "I just couldn't see it before. And now I see beauty everywhere. In the sunrise, in the faces of the people who come here seeking comfort, in the stories of survival and growth. Even in the scars," Joseph smiled. "The golden repair." "The golden repair," Margaret agreed. They stood in comfortable silence, two souls who had found each other at exactly the right moment, watching the world wake up to another day of infinite possibility. Inside the diner, the coffee was brewing, the griddle was heating up, and soon the space would fill with the voices of people seeking sustenance for both body and soul. Margaret no longer saw herself as just a restaurant owner. She was a keeper of stories, a witness to healing, a living example that the worst moments of our lives can become the foundation for our greatest triumphs. The three women who had once tormented her occasionally drove past, but they never stopped. Margaret felt no anger toward them anymore, only a distant sadness for the emptiness that drove their cruelty. She had learned that hurt people, but healed people heal people. "Ready for another day?" Joseph asked as they headed inside. "More than ready," Margaret replied, her voice strong and sure. "I'm grateful for it." And she was. Grateful for the pain that had taught her empathy, for the loss that had shown her what truly mattered, for the cruelty that had revealed her own capacity for kindness, and for the stranger who had seen gold where others saw only brokenness. The diner filled with the sounds of morning, coffee percolating, bacon sizzling, conversations beginning. But underneath it all was something else, something that couldn't be heard but could definitely be felt. The quiet hum of healing, the gentle rhythm of hearts mending, the powerful energy of a community built on understanding rather than judgment. Margaret moved through her morning routine with purpose and joy, no longer the broken woman who had knelt on the floor gathering ceramic shards. She was someone new, someone stronger, someone who had learned that the heart, like broken pottery, could indeed be repaired with gold, becoming more beautiful for having been broken. Hey my friends, help me by subscribing to the channel so we can reach 1,000 subscribers, even if you're watching from your TV or computer. Your subscription makes all the difference, and the algorithm will help you see more amazing stories. Leave a like or an emoji in the comments and be part of this growth. The success of Margaret's support group had drawn attention from beyond their small community. Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychologist from Phoenix, had heard about the informal healing circle happening in a roadside diner and drove out to see it for herself. She arrived on a Tuesday evening, slipping quietly into the back of the group. Margaret noticed the newcomer immediately, a well-dressed Asian woman in her 40s, taking notes and observing with professional interest. After the session ended and most members had left, Dr. Chen approached. "I'm Sarah Chen," she said, extending her hand. "I'm a licensed therapist, and I've heard remarkable things about what you're doing here." Margaret felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. "We're not doing anything official, just people talking to people. That's exactly what makes it so powerful," Dr. Chen replied. "I've been working with trauma survivors for 15 years, and I've rarely seen the kind of genuine healing that's happening in this room." Joseph, who had been quietly stacking chairs, joined the conversation. "Sometimes the best medicine doesn't come from a prescription pad," Dr. Chen nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. Margaret, I'd like to propose something. What if we could expand this? Create a formal program that could help even more people? Margaret's first instinct was to refuse. The group worked because it was simple, authentic, born from genuine experience rather than academic theory. I don't want to change what we have here. I'm not suggesting we change anything, Dr. Chen clarified. I'm suggesting we support it. Provide resources, training, maybe even funding to help more people access this kind of healing. Over the following weeks, Dr. Chen became a regular visitor, not as a professional observer, but as a genuine participant. She shared her own struggles with perfectionism and burnout, revealing the person behind the credentials. Margaret began to trust her intentions. "What exactly are you proposing?" Margaret asked one evening after the group had dispersed. "A partnership," Dr. Chen explained. "You continue doing exactly what you're doing, but with additional support. We could train facilitators to start similar groups in other communities. We could provide resources for people who need more intensive help. We could document what works here so others can learn from it." Joseph leaned back in his chair, considering. "And who controls this partnership?" "Margaret does," Dr. Chen said without hesitation. "This is her vision, her creation. I'm just offering to help it grow." Margaret felt overwhelmed by the possibilities and the responsibilities they would bring. "I never intended to start a movement. I just wanted to help a few people feel less alone." "The best movements start that way, Doctor," Chen replied, "with one person who cares enough to act." The decision wasn't easy. Margaret spent sleepless nights weighing the benefits against the risks. Would expanding the program dilute its effectiveness? Would bringing in professionals change the authentic peer-to-peer dynamic that made it work? It was Elena who helped her decide. Now, 6 months into her grief counseling program, Elena had been observing Margaret's dilemma with growing concern. "You're afraid of success," Elena said bluntly during one of their private conversations. "You're afraid that if this gets too big, you'll lose control of it." Margaret started to protest, but Elena held up her hand. "I understand the fear, but think about this. How many people are out there right now, sitting alone with their pain, wishing they had what we have here? Don't they deserve a chance at healing too?" The truth of Elena's words hit Margaret like a physical blow. She had been so focused on protecting what they had built that she had forgotten about all the people they weren't reaching. "What if we mess it up?" Margaret asked. "What if we don't try?" Elena countered. "You taught me that our pain has purpose when we use it to help others. This is your chance to help thousands of others." That night, Margaret called Dr. Chen. "Let's talk about this partnership." The planning process took months. Dr. Chen brought in experts in non-profit management, trauma therapy, and community outreach, but she kept her promise. Margaret remained in control of the vision and values that would guide the expansion. They decided to call it the Golden Repair Project, honoring Joseph's teaching about kintsugi and the beauty of healing broken things. The logo featured a simple coffee cup with golden cracks running through it, symbolizing both the brokenness and the beauty of the human experience. "It's perfect," Margaret said when she saw the design. "It tells our whole story in one image." The first satellite group launched in Tucson, facilitated by Maria, one of their original members who had found new purpose in helping others navigate divorce and abandonment. The second opened in Flagstaff, led by Frank, whose military experience and hard-won wisdom about PTSD made him a natural leader for veterans struggling with trauma. Each new group maintained the core principles Margaret had established: peer support rather than professional therapy, radical acceptance of all forms of grief and loss, and the belief that everyone's story mattered. Professional therapists were available for referrals when needed, but the groups themselves remained spaces for authentic human connection. "We're not trying to replace therapy," Margaret explained to a reporter who came to write about the project. We're filling a gap that therapy can't fill. The need for community, for belonging, for knowing you're not alone in your struggle. The article, published in a Phoenix newspaper, brought unexpected attention. Margaret's phone began ringing with calls from people across the country wanting to start their own golden repair groups. The simple website Dr. Chen had created crashed from traffic overload. "I think we underestimated the need, Doctor," Chen said, showing Margaret the flood of emails they had received. "People are desperate for this kind of authentic connection." Margaret read through the messages, her heart breaking and healing simultaneously with each story. A mother in Ohio whose son had died by suicide. A man in Florida whose wife had left him after 30 years of marriage. A teenager in California whose parents had died in a car accident. Each letter carried the same underlying message. "I thought I was the only one who felt this way." "We have to help them," Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. "All of them." But growth brought new challenges. Some people tried to commercialize the concept, starting groups that charged high fees or promised unrealistic outcomes. Others attempted to turn the groups into religious recruitment tools or political platforms. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Margaret confided to Joseph one evening as they dealt with yet another complaint about a group that had strayed from their principles. "Growing pains," Joseph replied calmly. "Every good thing gets tested when it spreads. The question is whether you're going to let the misuse stop you from doing the good work." Margaret knew he was right, but the responsibility felt overwhelming. She had never intended to become the guardian of a national movement. She just wanted to help people heal. The solution came from an unexpected source. Tommy, Joseph's grandson, had been quietly observing the challenges they faced. Now 28 and married with a young daughter, he had developed into a thoughtful young man with his grandfather's wisdom and his generation's technological savvy. "What if we created a certification process?" he suggested during one of their weekly planning meetings. "Not to make money, but to ensure quality. People who want to start groups would have to complete training that teaches them the real principles, not just the surface stuff." Dr. Chen's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant. We could develop an online training program that covers the core philosophy, basic group facilitation skills, and ethical guidelines." Margaret was skeptical. "Won't that make it too formal? Too institutional?" "Not if we do it right," Tommy replied. "We make the training about storytelling, about sharing your own healing journey, about understanding what real peer support looks like. We keep it human." The certification program took a year to develop. Margaret insisted on being involved in every aspect, ensuring that the training materials reflected the authentic spirit of what they had created. The program included video testimonials from group members, interactive exercises that helped potential facilitators examine their own motivations, and clear guidelines about what the groups were and weren't meant to do. The first cohort of certified facilitators graduated on a warm spring evening in Margaret's diner. 25 people from across the Southwest had completed the training, each carrying the skills and values needed to create healing spaces in their own communities. "You're not just starting support groups," Margaret told them during the graduation ceremony. "You're creating sanctuaries, places where people can bring their broken pieces and discover they're still whole." Elena, now a licensed grief counselor herself, served as the program's coordinator. Her transformation from a suicidal mother to a healer of others had become one of the project's most powerful testimonies. 2 years ago, I couldn't imagine surviving another day," Eleanor told the new facilitators. "Today, I'm helping other parents find reasons to keep living. That's the power of what we're doing here. We're not just healing ourselves, we're becoming healers." As the Golden Repair Project approached its 3rd anniversary, Margaret often found herself marveling at how far they had come. What had started as a desperate woman's attempt to find meaning in her suffering had grown into a network of over 200 support groups across 30 states. But the numbers, impressive as they were, weren't what mattered most to Margaret. What mattered were the individual stories, the letters from people who had found hope in their darkest moments, the photos of group members celebrating milestones in their healing journeys, the calls from facilitators sharing breakthroughs they had witnessed. "Do you ever regret it?" Dr. Chen asked one evening as they reviewed applications from people wanting to start international groups. "The quiet life you gave up?" Margaret looked around her diner, now bustling with activity even at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night. The support group was meeting in the back room, a facilitator training session was happening in the side dining area, and regular customers were enjoying dinner at the counter. "I never had a quiet life," Margaret replied. "I had a hidden life. There's a difference." Joseph, now 87, and moving more slowly but still sharp as ever, chuckled from his usual spot at the counter. "Maggie's always been a force of nature. She just needed the right storm to reveal it." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the front door. A young woman had entered, clearly distressed, looking around uncertainly. Margaret recognized the expression immediately, the desperate hope mixed with fear that characterized someone seeking help for the first time. "Can I help you?" Margaret asked gently, approaching the woman. I heard about a support group, my baby." The woman's voice broke, and she couldn't continue. Margaret's heart clenched with recognition and compassion. "You're in the right place. Come sit down. Let me get you some coffee." As Margaret guided the young woman to a quiet booth, she caught Joseph's eye. He nodded approvingly, his expression conveying what words couldn't. This was why they did the work, this moment when someone's pain met someone else's understanding. "What's your name?" Margaret asked, settling across from the woman. Jessica Martinez. I lost my daughter 3 months ago, Siddi's. Everyone keeps telling me it's not my fault, but I can't stop thinking that I should have done something different." Margaret reached across the table and gently took Jessica's hand. "I'm Margaret. I've lost 7 babies, and I want you to know that you're not alone anymore." Jessica's tears came in a flood, months of suppressed grief finally finding release in the presence of someone who truly understood. Margaret sat with her, offering tissues and quiet comfort, remembering her own first desperate moments in this same diner. "The support group meets every Tuesday," Margaret explained when Jessica's tears had subsided. "But you don't have to wait until Tuesday. This place is always open to people who need it." "Will it ever stop hurting?" Jessica asked, the question Margaret had heard hundreds of times from hundreds of different people. "It changes," Margaret replied honestly. "The sharp edges soften, the weight becomes more manageable, and eventually you find ways to carry it that don't break you, but more importantly, you'll find that your pain has purpose." Purpose. You'll help other mothers who lose babies. You'll understand their grief in a way that no one else can. Your broken heart will become medicine for other broken hearts. Jessica looked skeptical, as most people did when first hearing this concept. "I can't imagine ever being strong enough to help anyone else." "I said the same thing," Margaret replied, "but strength isn't something you have or don't have. It's something you develop by surviving things you thought would destroy you." Over the following weeks, Jessica became a regular presence in the diner and the support group. Her journey from devastated mother to healing participant to eventual group facilitator followed a pattern Margaret had observed many times, but it never stopped being miraculous. "She's going to be a powerful healer," Elena observed one evening after Jessica had shared her story with the group for the first time. "They all are," Margaret replied. "That's the secret. Everyone who survives profound loss has the potential to become a healer. They just need to discover it." The Golden Repair Project had attracted attention from researchers studying resilience and post-traumatic growth. Dr. Chen regularly presented their findings at conferences, always emphasizing that the success came not from professional intervention, but from the power of authentic peer connection. "What we've learned," Dr. Paul Chen explained to a gathering of mental health professionals, is that healing happens in relationship, not in the therapist's office necessarily, but in community, in spaces where people can be vulnerable without judgment, where their pain is witnessed and honored, rather than pathologized or rushed. Margaret occasionally attended these presentations, uncomfortable with the academic language, but committed to ensuring their work was accurately represented. She always insisted on speaking last, bringing the discussion back to human terms. "We're not doing anything revolutionary," she would tell the audiences of professionals. "We're doing something ancient, gathering in circles, sharing our stories, bearing witness to each other's pain and growth. The only thing that's revolutionary is that we've forgotten how to do this naturally." The project's success had brought opportunities Margaret never could have imagined. Publishers wanted her to write a book. Television producers wanted to create a documentary. Corporate executives wanted to license the golden repair model for employee wellness programs. "It's flattering," Margaret told Joseph one evening as they reviewed yet another proposal. "But I'm worried about losing the soul of what we've created." "What does your heart tell you?" Joseph asked, his standard response to Margaret's dilemmas. Margaret closed her eyes, centering herself in the way Joseph had taught her. "My heart says we need to be very careful about who we partner with and why. The moment this becomes about profit or fame instead of healing, we've lost everything that matters." They developed strict criteria for any partnerships or expansions. The core values were non-negotiable: peer support, accessibility regardless of ability to pay, respect for all forms of grief and loss, and commitment to authentic human connection over professional credentials. Several lucrative opportunities were declined because they didn't meet these standards. A major corporation wanted to create golden repair groups for their employees, but insisted on controlling the content and outcomes. A television network wanted to film group sessions, but couldn't guarantee participants' privacy and dignity. "We're not trying to build an empire," Margaret explained to disappointed business partners. "We're trying to heal hearts. Sometimes those goals are incompatible." The 4th anniversary of the project coincided with the 5th anniversary of Robert's death. Margaret had planned to mark the occasion quietly, but the community had other ideas. Over 300 people gathered in the high school gymnasium for a celebration that honored both the project's growth and the personal journey that had inspired it. Elena served as the evening's host, her transformation from broken mother to confident leader, serving as a living testament to the power of peer support. 5 years ago, Margaret Williams was a woman who had lost everything she thought mattered, Elena told the assembled crowd. Today, she's a woman who has found everything that actually matters. Speaker after speaker shared stories of healing, growth, and renewed purpose. Jessica Martinez, now training to become a facilitator herself, spoke about finding meaning in her daughter's brief life. Frank discussed how helping other veterans had given him a reason to keep fighting his own battles. Maria talked about discovering that the end of her marriage had been the beginning of her real life. But it was Joseph who brought the evening to its emotional climax. Now 88 and using a walker, he moved slowly to the podium with the dignity that had always defined him. 5 years ago, I walked into a diner and found a woman gathering broken pieces of pottery, he began, his voice still strong despite his age. I told her that broken things could be repaired with gold, made more beautiful for having been broken. I had no idea I was talking to someone who would prove that truth on a scale I never imagined. He paused, looking directly at Margaret. Margaret Williams, you have taken your broken heart and used it to heal thousands of other broken hearts. You have turned your deepest pain into your greatest gift. You have shown the world what it means to transform suffering into service. The standing ovation lasted several minutes, but Margaret barely heard it. She was thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The cruel words that had shattered her remaining defenses, the stranger who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself, the gradual discovery that her pain had purpose. When the crowd finally quieted, Margaret took the microphone. 5 years ago, 3 women told me I was a failure. They were wrong about many things, but they were right about one thing. The old Margaret Williams was a failure. She was failing to see her own worth, failing to recognize her own strength, failing to understand that her pain could become her power. She looked out at the sea of faces, group members, facilitators, supporters, and skeptics who had become believers. But that failure was necessary. I had to break completely before I could be repaired with gold. We all did. Every person in this room has been broken in some way, and every person in this room has chosen to let that breaking become the beginning of something beautiful. Margaret's voice grew stronger as she continued. The Golden Repair Project isn't about me. It's about all of us. It's about the truth that our worst moments can become our most powerful moments. It's about the fact that wounded healers are the most effective healers. It's about the revolutionary idea that ordinary people supporting each other can create extraordinary healing. She paused, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had built together. 5 years ago, I thought my story was ending. Today, I know it was just beginning. And your stories, all of your stories, are just beginning too. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Margaret found herself standing with Joseph and Dr. Chen, watching the crowd disperse. Many attendees lingered, reluctant to end the celebration, forming small groups to continue conversations that had started during the formal program. "Look at that," Dr. Chen observed, gesturing to the spontaneous gatherings. "Even at a celebration, they're creating healing circles." "That's what happens when you give people permission to be real with each other," Margaret replied. "They don't want to go back to superficial interactions." Joseph leaned heavily on his walker, fatigue evident in his posture. "I won't see where this goes," he said quietly, "but I've seen enough to know it will outlast all of us." Margaret felt a chill of premonition. Joseph had been slowing down noticeably in recent months, though he refused to admit it. "Don't talk like that. You're going to be around for years yet." Joseph smiled, the expression both sad and peaceful. "I've lived long enough to see my words become reality. A woman with a heart of pure gold has indeed transformed her pain into healing for thousands. That's more than most people get to witness in a lifetime." 3 weeks later, Joseph passed away peacefully in his sleep. The funeral drew hundreds of people whose lives he had touched, but it was the memorial service at Margaret's diner that truly captured his spirit. "He saw gold where others saw brokenness," Margaret said, addressing the packed room. "He saw potential where others saw failure. He saw healing where others saw only hurt. And he taught us all to see ourselves through his eyes as wounded healers with the power to transform pain into purpose." Tommy, now the project's operations manager, had inherited his grandfather's wisdom along with his practical skills. "Grandfather always said that teachers appear when students are ready," he told the gathering. Margaret was ready to learn and he was ready to teach. But the real magic happened when Margaret became the teacher and started helping others learn the same lessons. Joseph's death marked a transition for Margaret and the project. The man who had been her anchor and guide was gone, but his teachings lived on in every group session, every facilitator training, every moment when someone chose to see beauty in brokenness. "He's still here," Elena observed one evening as they prepared for the weekly support group. "Every time we help someone see their own worth, every time we turn pain into purpose, he's here." Margaret nodded, feeling the truth of those words. Joseph's physical presence was gone, but his spiritual presence permeated everything they did. The Golden Repair Project had become his living legacy, proof that one person's wisdom could ripple out to heal countless others. As the project entered its 6th year, Margaret found herself thinking more about legacy and sustainability. She was 58 now, healthy and energetic, but aware that she wouldn't be able to lead the organization forever. The question was how to ensure that the values and vision that had made it successful would survive leadership transitions. We need to institutionalize the wisdom without institutionalizing the bureaucracy, Dr. Chen observed during one of their strategic planning sessions. What does that mean in practical terms? Margaret asked. It means creating systems that preserve the heart of what we do, while allowing for growth and change. It means training leaders who understand not just the methods, but the spirit behind them. They developed a leadership development program that focused as much on personal growth as professional skills. Potential leaders had to complete their own healing journeys before they could guide others. They had to demonstrate not just competence, but compassion, not just knowledge, but wisdom. Elena emerged as Margaret's natural successor, her combination of lived experience, professional training, and deep commitment to the project's values, making her an ideal leader. But Margaret wasn't ready to step back yet. There was still too much work to do, too many people to help, too many communities that needed healing circles. The project's reach continued to expand. International groups had formed in Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia. Specialized programs had developed for specific populations: veterans, healthcare workers, parents who had lost children, people dealing with chronic illness. But it was the original Tuesday night group in Margaret's diner that remained the heart of everything. New members still arrived broken and desperate, just as Margaret had been 6 years earlier, and they still found healing in the simple act of sharing their stories with people who understood. "This is where it all started," Margaret often told visitors who came to see the famous diner, "and this is where it continues. One broken heart at a time, one story at a time, one moment of connection at a time." The diner itself had become a pilgrimage site of sorts, drawing people from across the country who wanted to experience the birthplace of their healing. Margaret had mixed feelings about the attention, but she couldn't deny the power of place in the healing process. "There's something about this room," a group member observed one evening. "You can feel the healing that's happened here." Margaret looked around the familiar space. The counter where Joseph had first sat, the booth where she had comforted Jessica, the corner where countless people had shared their deepest pain and found unexpected hope. The physical space held the energy of thousands of healing moments. "Places absorb the emotions that happen in them," Margaret replied. "This place has absorbed a lot of pain, but it's also absorbed a lot of love. Maybe that's what people feel." As the evening wound down and the last group members headed home, Margaret performed her nightly ritual of cleaning and preparing for the next day. The routine had become a meditation, a way of honoring the sacred work that happened in this ordinary space. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the cruelty that had broken her open, the stranger who had seen her worth, the gradual discovery that her deepest wounds could become her greatest gifts. It had been a long, difficult path, but she wouldn't change any of it. The broken coffee pot that had started it all sat on a shelf behind the counter, its golden repairs clearly visible. Margaret had kept it as a reminder of where she had been and how far she had come. Like her own heart, it was more beautiful for having been broken. Outside, the Arizona desert stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars. Inside, the diner stood ready for another day of serving both food and hope to anyone who needed either. And Margaret Williams, the woman who had once thought her story was ending, prepared for another day of helping others discover that their stories were just beginning. The Golden Repair Project had grown beyond anything she had imagined, but its essence remained unchanged. The simple, powerful truth that broken things could be made beautiful, that wounded people could become healers, and that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing you ever do, Hey, my friends, help me by subscribing to the channel so we can reach 1,000 subscribers, even if you're watching from your TV or computer. Your subscription makes all the difference, and the algorithm will help you see more amazing stories. Leave a like or an emoji in the comments and be part of this growth.